and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to be continuing to review Autism, a new introduction to psychological theory and current debate, Sue Fletcher-Watson and Francesca Happe, because there's lots in this book that I want to discuss, hence the fact why I'm doing quite a few reviews on it. Thank you as always to all your comments, which I always take time to read, and do please press like so that this video can be shown so that more people get to see this video, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and press the notification bell to be notified of other videos. Okay, so without further ado, let's get on to the video. In the previous video, I left off where I was discussing theory of mind and the false photo task. And a key question in autism research at the moment is whether or not the theory of mind deficit is primary or not. So whether or not all of the problems and behaviours in autism are directly caused by a primary deficit in theory of mind. That's the question. Does theory of mind also explain the non-social elements then, such as repetitive behaviours, is another question. Do these infiltrate the cognitive space? So do the repetitive behaviours infiltrate the cognitive space that is otherwise occupied by social knowledge and absorb resources that other non-autistics give over to recording details about other people? So, you know, if we're not so kind of primed to focus on the social world, then we're not going to pick up the knowledge about theory of mind that, say, non-autistic people do. And conversely, we're going to likely to develop more knowledge in the non-social elements of the world through our repetitive behaviours. Or are the repetitive behaviours, as I mentioned in a previous video, simply an attempt to manage the anxiety of a confusing world? Of course, it could be both of those. Are repetitive behaviours most intense when the theory of mind is most profound? So that would suggest that when the social difficulties in autism are most severe, if you like, there's going to be an equal severity with the repetitive behaviours. However, there is not a lot of association here, because it's been shown that an autistic person might have very severe repetitive behaviours, but their social problems might be comparatively less severe, or conversely, they might have very severe social problems but actually not show that much in the way of repetitive behaviours, and of course that can change over the lifespan, or it could be equally severe. But because there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of association, so it doesn't follow that just because say the repetitive behaviours are intense, but the social difficulties are going to be equally intense, that does not suggest that this doesn't suggest that there's a kind of simplistic relationship between the two, and that would then support for the fractionated triad idea instead, which I talked about in a previous video, the idea that each aspect of autism is fractionable, so each aspect of autism is separate from the other, that they're caused by different things, different genetic causes cause the different aspects, are behind the different aspects of autism. So autism is not a homogeneous condition, if you like. Each part of autism could be caused by different things. So if that's the case, then that would kind of contradict the idea that theory of mind is primary, because if each part of autism is caused by something different, then theory of mind can't be behind every single part of autism. Another suggestion, which is also put forward, is whether or not executive functioning is in fact a primary deficit. But again, there is no straightforward answers here. We do not have an answer. So executive functioning is planning, and things like planning and working memory and things like that. But executive functioning is not unique to autism. There are, you can have executive functioning problems without autism. But then again, if autism is a composite of cognitive features, as suggested by the fractionated triad theory, then not all ingredients need to be unique to autism, because you could inherit, say, different features, and only if you inherit all of these different features would you get autism, but each feature can be inherited on its own, and each feature is inherited separately to the other features. If for some reason you get autism when all of these features are inherited together, and yet each feature of autism does not share the same genetic cause. So the social difficulties will share a different set of genes, say to repetitive behaviours, which is why you can have them on their own, and in which case you wouldn't have autism, you just have those problems on their own. So just change over here. Another theory is that these features, so the executive functioning difficulties, are not a core part of autism at a cognitive level, but they may co-occur with autism quite often, and that such challenges then make it harder to mask and compensate for social difficulties. So in other words, it's possible to be autistic without significant executive functioning problems, and they argue elsewhere in the book that these autistics are more likely to be successful, which I actually think makes sense, because if you say have minimal executive functioning or even no executive functioning problems, then you're going to be less held back, and maybe you're then more likely, and this is a lot more likely to go hand in hand with like a higher IQ, although you can have severe executive functioning problems and a high IQ, so the two it's not like a clear-cut relationship between the two, but it's more likely that for some people with a high IQ who don't have so many executive functioning problems, they're more likely to be able to be successful, to say, have be able to work and things like that, and have better outcomes. But because executive functioning problems to greater or lesser degree they do co-occur with autism very often, and that then the challenges just make it harder to compensate for the social problems. But but executive functioning, it's argued, is probably not a core feature of autism. So there's less weight to executive functioning as being a core part of autism than there is to theory of mind being a core part of autism. I think the consensus currently is still that theory of mind is a core part of autism, but of course it's still only a theory. So it's argued here that if you have good executive functioning, you might be getting by at school and work using a series of rules, switching between these in response to changing contexts, and relying on working memory, flexibility and planning. But of course it is still incredibly tiring, because if you're relying heavily on executive functioning, that might lead to greater burnout, whereas a non-autistic person will be relying less on their executive functioning and more on their intuitive, innate skills. So it's argued that successful autistics will use executive functioning to sort of, in a sense, compensate for their social difficulties, but that it still is likely to lead to a greater amount of burnout. So I do think that's possibly quite plausible. I mean, I do wonder often whether and this is something I've realised, but I do really struggle with executive functioning. And this, I think, was probably one of the reasons why I was so held back at school, particularly in my earlier school years, before I'd worked out a kind of strategy but I really struggled with organisation. This was actually written on my school report. My organisation skill, well, it said Anna's organisational skills are very poor, so you should just dump everything in the same place. And I really struggled with homework, with writing down homework and doing what was expected of me and all of those things, and I needed a hell of a lot of input from my parents to sort of structure my revision and things like that. And also I'm very good at sort of mono-focusing on one thing for very long periods of time, but I can't do that and do other things. And as an adult, I really struggle with the organisation of things that don't interest me. So outside of my very fixed, some would say rigid routines, I really struggle to kind of organise my life and attend to things that are important but are not immediately interesting to me. So I definitely really struggle with executive functioning, and I think that might be why, say, I struggle relative to some other autistics who possibly have less severe executive functioning difficulties, who are then able to go out to work and do all of those things. So that's possible. So I'm going to move on to video number 2 now.